was Doris, and I wanted to go over my CRAMATHON. I had 7 books on my TBR, and I read 6 of them, and 1 more. So I didn't quite read 7 books in 7 days. It took me 8 days, but I read 6.5 in 7 days. So I thought that was good. And 7 books in 8 days, that's good too. So I'm just going to dive in. These are in no particular order, so I'll just be rambling. This one was my book that's been sitting around forever, and it's probably been collecting dust on my nightstand for 3 years now. This is the one that I grabbed at a friend's house. Her son was reading it for his summer reading list at school, and he'd finished, and I brought it home because it looked good to me, because, you know, I liked all these little awards down the side. This was fabulous. Like, I don't even know why I waited so long. It's a middle grades novel. It's futuristic. It's set in the border between the US and Mexico, which has now become its own country called Opium. It's basically run by drug lords, and yeah, there's clones, there's communism, there's so much to talk about in this book. This will make great discussions, which is obviously why the teacher put it on the reading list. I would highly recommend this for anyone. It was thoroughly enjoyable. Then I read Bumblebee, which was my picture book. It's not really a picture book. They were like little scientific diagrams. I enjoyed this. It's written kind of an amateur scientist. I just love bumblebees, and I've always wondered where they lived, and now I know. So, yay. And then my friend Dahmer. This was another excellent read. This was for my graphic novel, and yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I'm assuming everyone knows who Dahmer is, but if you do not, I would Google it. It's very disturbing. But this was his early years, middle school and high school, and it was actually written and illustrated by someone who grew up with him. So that was fascinating to me, the perspective there. And initially I didn't like the fact that in the beginning he keeps saying, where were the adults when all this was going on, and they could have prevented his downward spiral. And which, it disturbed me because I'm a public school teacher, and I think we try our best to do a good job. But I guess I realized that, yes, his parents were so caught up in their own problems that they didn't notice. And the teachers, I guess it was just a different era, because we kind of catch on to kids drinking and smoking at school and do something about it. It's completely zero tolerance. But I guess in the 60s and 70s that wasn't the case. So I need to ask my sisters, because they went to school in the 70s. I was an 80s child. So yeah, I'm going to ask them what the school was like. I think that'll be an interesting conversation. I read Tales of the Peculiar. This was my under 200 pages book. And I haven't read a lot of short stories. They're not, I guess, my jam, or I just haven't taken the time. I didn't really get interested in the stories in the first half, but the second half, I really liked those a lot more. But the thing that really I loved about this was the pictures. And, you know, Ransom Riggs' Tales of the Peculiar, that it's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. There's some stories that go along with that world. And the thing that I just loved was the illustrations. This illustrator was brilliant, and you could tell that he really read the stories and took the texts and worked with them. They're just amazing. And look at this locust eye. When you read the story, it'll totally make sense, but this was a brilliant brilliantly illustrated book. And then I finished the second half of this. I had already started it. This is the Grisha series, and that's the one I said I didn't know what book I would be on when CRAMATHON started. So I was halfway through that one and finished it. And then I read this one, Ruin and Rising, and finished it. And then I read this one immediately after. So these were my 2 books in one day. And I also read a couple other, I think Dahmer and Dahmer. I don't know. I read 2 more in one day as well, but I don't remember which 2. But anyway, this one was great. I understand what all the hype is. I'm an ESL teacher, so I really appreciated this. I liked the way she represented different cultures within the United States, because we do have so many different cultures living in this country. And I didn't think that I was going to enjoy the whole story taking place in one day. I didn't think I was going to buy that storyline, but I totally did. It was just so charming. Very charming. I liked her dialogue. She does a really good job of understanding the way teenagers talk, and a really good job of being able to speak in other voices, like non-native speakers, which that's something that'll get to me really quickly. I can't stand stilted conversation or inconsistent speech patterns, so she did a great job with that. And I just love this book from beginning to end. I totally was reeled into the storyline. Liked it a lot. And that leaves me with my fantasy genres, which I love fantasy, but I have to say, I miss the epic fantasy of my youth. I grew up in the 80s, like I said earlier, and I cut my teeth on Tolkien and Terry Brooks, the original Shannara series, and I just come to realize that I'm kind of over the sex and the fantasy right now, because it just takes away from the grandiose storyline, in my opinion. I mean, it just turns them into little romance novels. I don't know. Like, I liked the world building in this. I liked the magic. They didn't have a lot of mysterious creatures, which, you know, was nice. It was fine. But, like, this one had one girl and 3 love interests for her, and so it was like this love rectangle, and it was a little confusing, and you never knew. Like, it was nice to keep guessing who it was going to be, but then you weren't really satisfied in the end. So yeah, it just took away from the story for me. But overall, I did enjoy it a lot. I'm not saying I didn't. And Graceling was the same way. This story, I enjoyed the 2 main characters a lot more, and I was more satisfied with their relationship. But I just felt like it wasn't the same epic story that it could have been. But I really loved the series. I'm not saying I didn't. I loved it a lot, and I'm looking forward to reading the other 2, because I realized that when I finished this one, I looked up the other 2, and I realized that these are more like the Terry Brooks Shannara series, in that each of the 3 books is almost a standalone. Like, this is the same world, and I'm sure these characters are going to reappear in the other 2, but they're not going to be central focus. So I really like that style of a series, and yeah, I liked this one a great deal. And I love this one too. I'm not saying I didn't, but that was just a little pet peeve that I'm having at the moment. And then the other one that I had on my TBR for CRAMATHON was 11/22/63, and I have totally just DNF'd it. And I don't DNF books casually. I think that's the 3rd one that I've done that to in my adult lifetime, or the adult lifetime that I remember currently. But I had started it 2 or 3 years ago. I don't even remember. And it was on my e-reader, and I tried to read it twice and it went back before I got into it. And this was the third time I had it, and I was 400 pages into it, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is an 800-page book. And I'm not above reading an 800-page book. That's not the problem. But it was just, I'd read 400 pages and wasn't engaging with the storyline. And I think, I'm not saying it's not a good book, because I think it is. I mean, it's got a 4-star rating over most of the boards, so people are enjoying it. I just wasn't. And one of the things that I think bothered me, or it didn't bother me, it just bored me, honestly. He was trying to do too many genres. Like, it was a thriller, a historical thriller. So, being that it was trying to go back in time and prevent the Kennedy assassination, you kind of know what's going to happen in the end, sort of. But the pacing was off. Like, it was supposed to be a thriller, but he was also trying to make it this quaint little retro story, and I wasn't buying that, because I don't know if Stephen King is really a quaint retro story kind of writer. So his writing was very, you know, factual. His dialogue was great, but I just wasn't engaging with how he was writing it. I wasn't engaging with his characters. And he would do things like, he would spend a whole chapter getting to know the guy at the pawn shop where he was buying his surveillance equipment. And I would have rather him just spent 2 paragraphs just getting the equipment to pick up the pace of the story. He did the same thing with the apartment that he was going to put under surveillance. Lee Harvey Oswald was going to move into that apartment in the next month or two, and he spent a whole chapter getting to know the woman that lived there previously, and I just didn't really see how it was contributing to the story except by adding to the length of it. But I'm not saying it wasn't a good book. I'm just saying it bored me personally, and I was like, I just have so many exciting books sitting around in my house right now, and I don't want to have any lingering books. So that's one of my New Year's goals, is to get rid of these few lingering books that are unfinished. So I was just like, no, I'm not going to read it. So there you go. This was my CRAMATHON. I'm pretty happy with what I did. And thanks for the challenges, Whitney and April. And I will be back soon. Bye.